much, John. So thanks a lot for coming. We're doing well. Still to be in the game at this stage, I think, after 3 very full days. My name, as John said, is Gareth Popkins. I'm from London, and I am sort of a veteran, I was just saying, of these. It's actually the 5th gathering I've attended, so a few of you will also have all those notches as well, I'm sure. I have, just to introduce myself, I have a background as a historian and a lawyer and a language enthusiast. I have a website called howtogetfluent.com, and you may have seen me running around with this camera, and I'm a vlogger as well, so I've been doing daily vlogs from the gathering. If you haven't seen those, you can see them at my site or the YouTube channel, which is also called How to Get Fluent with Gareth Popkins. If you haven't been in the vlog and you would like to, come and accost me today, because this is the last day. The talent question. You look around you in this room, you see all these amazing people. There we all are last year. They didn't have one of these 360-degree photos this time. I'm not sure why. You may recognize yourself there, slightly distorted perhaps. But when you look at people, you may glance nervously at the name tags that they have with all these flags on. Do you sometimes have a sneaking suspicion that there's some really pretty serious, hardcore language talent at this gathering among your friends? And maybe that you might not quite cut the mustard. Or actually, is it just a matter of getting on top of the methods and, upping your game a bit? Can anybody do it? Can anybody become a talented multilingual, a talented polyglot? That's the question we're going to be looking at. Okay, now point it in that direction. So I don't want to believe in talent personally, not at all. I want to think you get the mindset right, use the right methods and put in the time and get the practice, and then we can all do it. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right, as they say. We can all be language champions. That picture is supposed to represent, the gold medal. Does anyone know what that is, actually? Anyone who was here last year?
Language for most languages spoken under one roof?
That's right. We had a competition last year at the very end to break the record of the most languages spoken under one roof in Slovakia. And that was the medal which was awarded when you all crushed it together. So we could all perhaps be champions if we just get the methods right. It's just a question of effective hard work. Well, actually, a lot of the most successful language learners do say just that. They say, I'm just a normal guy, I'm a regular guy, I was no good at languages at school. That's the sort of thing you've heard. And then I put my mind to it and I started working at languages. There's no mystery to it. It's just about investing, getting the techniques right. Well, some of the really great language learners are giving that encouraging message, that message that I want to hear. So, for example, if you look at Mario P., he said, we may as well resign ourselves to the fact that the road will be long and difficult. It will take many years of intensive work of different varieties. Kato Lom, the famous Hungarian polyglot, said in her book, it's time invested multiplied by interestedness divided by inhibition, which gives the result. So time is a key factor there. That already is getting a bit mathematical for me, that one. But many of the polyglots you will have seen around here will tell you the same sort of thing. It requires a huge effort to get good at, to move up the language scale. I've watched videos, polyglots talking just about how much work they actually seriously do, how hard they find starting new languages. And so that does lead me to think, well, maybe it isn't so much about talent after all. And yet, there's still this sneaking feeling that our individual endowments do actually play quite an important role. Now, obviously, if you're growing up with several languages at home, or with a heritage language, or you have moved to a country in childhood and learned the language, then been put in a school. Clearly these are advantages, and this is going to feed through into your later language learning if you run with it. There's nothing we can do about that. But, then what about the cognitive endowments that each of us have? That's really what I'm focusing on in the first part of this talk. We must all know people who seem to have a great ear. They could be great mimics, I've got a friend who's a great mimic. He's hilarious. The only problem is I never get to hear the one of me, of course. But this is a talent. I don't think he's practicing that. I think it's just something he can do innately. Maybe you can train up the ability, but I don't think he's doing that. So probably got some mimics in the room. The Queen of England apparently is supposed to be a very good mimic in private as well. So something I discovered recently. Spelling. Not a problem, perhaps, unless you're doing English. But I still can't spell, I still find spelling in English pretty challenging, despite having spent the whole of my life with texts, reading and so on, and doing all the things we're supposed to do to improve our skills. And English is my first language. Yet other people can remember very easily spellings. Memory in general. Some people may seem to have a better memory. They can access facts quicker. So these are the sort of, perhaps, innate differences that I wanted to just pick apart a bit in the talk. And I'm talking really very much about cognitive ability. So I've been doing some reading, and these were the main sources I used to get an insight into the research. Rod Ellis's book, Vivian Cook, and Patsy Lightbrown and Nida Sprada. So I'm citing the discussions that they've got in their books about aptitude and language learning, looking at the concept of aptitude, particularly the cognitive aspect. Then we'll broaden it out. So research on cognitive ability and differences between individuals got started really in the 1950s and 60s. And research got underway as to what successful language learners had in common. And the concept of aptitude became current and was developed. And the key people who started this off were Carroll and Sapon, and they developed this modern language aptitude test at the end of the 1950s. It's still going. Has anybody come across this? Has anybody done this test? It's sometimes used to classify who is likely to be able to be learning a language effectively and quickly, who's a good language learner. It's used by diplomatic services, for example, sometimes by businesses deciding whether they're going to send people on foreign missions, if you like. And what Carroll and Sapon did was they split up they tried to break down cognitive ability, the aspects of talent or knack when you're learning a language. And they looked at the phonemic side, the sound working with phonemes. They looked at people's grammatical sensitivities, their innate abilities in that area, and they looked at people's ability to inductive learning ability, to generalize. And then they also looked at the rote learning, which is moving into sort of the short-term memory aspect and the working memory aspect. So they looked at memory. And these were the four aspects, they thought, which together gave you a level of aptitude and likelihood to succeed as a language learner. And the research on individual differences in ability has built on sort of a critique of this initial starting point. And the critique has come from various angles. So the problem is with a lot of the research, the more I've looked into it, it's been done in very traditional sort of classroom type settings, rather different perhaps from some of the types of language learning that we as individually and highly motivated language learners might go in for. It has. We need to broaden out. It was developed also at an earlier period when the grammar translation approach was still fashionable, or then there was audiolingual drilling came in as a way of teaching in the 1960s. But what about, so that's when Carroll was working, developing these ideas. What about more communicative methods? Are these cognitive qualities still the key thing there? And what about informal language acquisition in real life? Is our cognitive endowment important for that as well? Stephen Krashen argued that aptitude was important in formal language situations, such as those in which Carroll and others were developing their testing. But for informal language situations, Attitude was important, he said. Your attitude towards learning is what was going to determine your success, rather than your brain cells, if we like. But there does seem to be a correlation between skills in those areas, phonemic ability, grammatical, inductive, and memory, and success in language learning, whatever methods and in whatever situation you actually come to learn a language. But let's break down the monolithic concept of aptitude, which Carroll had developed with these different aspects, these 4 aspects. Because he came up with a sort of grand total that each individual would have. You either have a high, medium, or a low aptitude. But it could be that learners are strong in some areas and not so strong in others. It could be that the type of learning also plays a really significant role in how well you perform. So if it's implicit learning, maybe phonological abilities are more important. If you're just hearing sentences, learning using a method such as Glossica, where you're working with whole sentences, maybe the sound abilities are more important. What about explicit learning, where grammar and structures are being explained to you? Maybe then it's the analytical ability which is more important. So you can break it down, and what people have found, unsurprisingly, is that you can break down, people have strengths in these different areas, and if you teach them according to the areas in which they have strength, they're going to do just as well. They're going to get there in the end, nevertheless. So there's more than one way to skin a cat, as we say. There's more than one way to get to the top of the mountain. If you've got a great ear, but you've got a bad memory, or if you've got a great memory, but a bad ear, with a different approach, you can still get there. So you may have less, talent in one aspect, but you can counterbalance in the other. So it's not an aggregate aptitude altogether. And then, Peter Skehen as well developed a second method. He's another big name in this area. And he sort of refined the factors, the cognitive factors which make up talent. And he talked about the phonemic coding ability, the same as Carroll. He talked about language analytic ability. And he talked about memory as well, more explicitly. And he also said that there are 4 stages in language acquisition, and each of these different aspects of cognitive skills of talent are important at the different stages. So he was saying you go through a noticing stage with a new language, you see a new feature of it, then you start to pattern and try and integrate that feature. You may end up overgeneralizing. Then you control it much more, you're able to use and deploy it. And finally, it's what was called lexicalized. That's to say, it's rolling off your tongue as a chunk without you actually having to think about the language you're using as you go along. And he said that at the different stages, different aspects of aptitude were important. So the phonemic coding quality, when you're at the noticing stage, working memory, all the way through really, I think, and for patterning, the language analytic ability. We saw some of this happening if anyone was in the learning to sing in Persian session yesterday. We had the words on the text of the song, and we were being asked to try and work out what they meant, and I could already see some people were deducing across that sort of analytic ability is very strong for some people, less strong for others. So aptitude isn't monolithic, it's got different aspects. You can be taught in different ways to compensate, and also different aspects of your talent may be important at different stages in the language learning process. Can aptitude develop over time? This is another question. Are you just born with a certain ability, or can you actually, by learning languages, improve your phonemic coding ability, or improve your analytical ability? Another big question, a bit difficult to pull apart because, of course, we all do also learn learning strategies. So we know what to expect of ourselves, and we're more realistic. We know that we have to come back to material. We know that we're not going to be fluent overnight. So it's difficult to pull apart what's actually just our increased experience and what is actually an increase in our mental capacity, if you like, objectively said. And it seems, from what I've read, that the jury is out. It's very difficult to do, particularly when you're researching classroom language teaching, studies which enable you to compare effectively, because the researchers are working with different groups of migrants, groups of children, people of different levels of motivation, teachers of different ability. It's very difficult to do sort of controlled experiments in this area. But the general view is, and of course this ties in now with the latest ideas about neuroplasticity, that some aspects of your objective abilities may actually be capable of development with use. But a lot of what goes on, of course, is simply experience, if you like, put it down to experience as we become more experienced language learners. I sort of suspect, I'll always have weaknesses in certain areas, but I've got workarounds. That's the difference, isn't it? It's workarounds rather than trying constantly leads to an actual improvement. Or maybe the new neurons are forming, a bit of both, I suppose. So maybe aptitude develops over time, maybe it's experience and learning strategies which we can develop. I just wanted to take a quick look at working memory in a bit more detail. This is an area, of course, where the research is still in its infancy, but everybody agrees that working memory is, I think is key for language learning. This is the ability to hold pieces of information in your mind. It's usually, people say 7. It could be one individual piece of information or chunks of information, and this is the way, apparently, that we're able to speak, because the working memory of nobody's working memory is big enough to deal with all the load that you have to carry when you're speaking a language. So we work in chunks. Working memory is thought to be extremely important and in language learning. So working memory, though, different people are more talented than others when it comes to working memory. It also changes with age. It's supposed to peak in your early 20s, and it's downhill from there on. But that's not the whole story. That's not the whole story. So even if our abilities are objectively declining as we get older in working memory, or we just weren't particularly well endowed on day one, it doesn't mean, of course, we can't work smart with what we've got. So, and so this is work moving into a bit, I suppose, the learning strategies approach and the meta-learning awareness. Again, this is not about your objective brain cell aptitude, as it were, your capacities. It's about working smart. So on the memory side, we can work with, focus on meaning and not on rote learning when we're learning our languages. It's true that as we get older, our working memory capacity declines, but on the other hand, we've just got a lot more in our heads, hopefully. So we have more concepts and more experiences into which we can integrate the things that we're learning. So if we do deep processing, try and build lots of connections with the new concepts, the new words that we're learning. Again, we've got more to go on. We've got memories we can draw on to improve our memory capacity. And this is working smart with memory in general, I think, not just working memory. We looked at the gold list. Anyone at the gold list talk? Ways about working with getting into the long-term memory too. And that's a very interesting area, I think, this interplay between short-term working and long-term memory. To what extent is, can you go straight into long-term memory, which seems to me, in a way, what gold listing is trying to do. So spaced repetition then is one of the techniques which you can use, which will be familiar, I think, to all of you, which the Go List method or Anki use. We should use elaborative rehearsal, not just maintenance review. So you should try and creatively recall and use what you've learned 2 weeks ago, whatever, not just passively repeating, not passively reading through a chapter of a book if you're revising for an exam. You should try and draw a mind map of the book or something like that. And with your languages too, you may try to write some sentences first in the, say you're revising a certain situation, going to the shop or something, try and say some things spontaneously, record yourself or write it down, and then go back. So try and elaborate and interact actively. Always try and turn your learning as active as possible. Interleaving is also thought to be a good idea, so short bursts of different material. So study the verbs for half an hour, move on to some listening practice, rather than a big blast, where you're spending 4 or 5 hours massed practice, as they say. So that's another way of, apparently, that helps develop your memories. And to test yourself, not to be tricked by illusions of knowing. So really trying to put yourself on the spot and not just think, well, I can do this, I know this. So there are ways that we can box clever, if you like, with the memory endowment that we have. So that's the picture. There may be differences. First of all, cognitive language learning abilities are complex. There are different elements: our ear, our memory, our analytical abilities. But different aspects, there are different ways of being taught. And also you can, compensate, skin a cat in different ways by making sure that you're learning in a way that suits you. So it's not an all or nothing thing. And that's where I want to come to now, is where does this all leave us? Cognitive ability, as I say, is complex. There are different elements to it that are important at different stages, and you don't need to be strong in them all. And anyway, it's not an either-or situation. You don't either have a good ear or you don't. You don't either have a good memory or you don't. You're not either very analytical or you're not. It's on a scale, isn't it? It's on a scale in all of these different abilities. So generally, I think, average is going to be enough, and we'll all probably be above average in some aspects of our cognitive endowment and maybe below in others. And then, as we said, anyway, some of these abilities may develop with practice, may be capable of developing with practice. And trying to learn in our heads as a result of input, output, these sort of cognitive approaches is not the full picture anyway when you're learning a language. Oh, before we move on, there's another picture from a previous Polyglot gathering. Anybody recognize themselves in that one? It's a bit light. 2015, what's 2016? Yes? That's all the participants over the age of 25, I think it was, wasn't it? Who were at the gathering? Yes, something like that. So now that's the reading glasses brigade. Those of us at the gathering a couple of years ago. Beyond aptitude, then, it's not just about the endowment that you have. It's also motivation. And from the very start of the research into individual differences, motivation has been recognized as important a factor as aptitude. Lots of people have talked a lot about motivation at the gatherings over the years, and for a good reason. So all the caveats I've said about whatever ability you were born with, how you can change it, that's only half the picture anyway. Motivation's really important. Other aspects of personality, whether you're introvert or extrovert, you maybe will approach things in different ways then. Whether you're shy, that can be changed. Your empathetic abilities, I went to a talk where this was mentioned. Tim Keeley was talking about this a lot yesterday. Your emotional approaches as well, your ability to listen. So a special knack or talent for languages isn't just the cognitive dimension anyway. There's a lot more to it. So it's beyond aptitude really, isn't it? And in the wider context then, there are some things you can't change, but there are other things that you can change. So you can't change, or it's harder to change, your basic introvert, extrovert settings, your age, your gender, health, your economic and social situation, who you are. All those things are going to influence your language learning experience and your likelihood of success. Sometimes there are variables, but we have to work to an extent, also in the broader sense, with the hand that we're dealt with. But there are some success-determining factors that we can influence directly. So we can be meta-aware, we can learn about learning. Some of the techniques I mentioned earlier on when I was talking about working with memory. We can implement the best techniques there, we can learn about phonology, and we can understand about the grammar and how languages work, the more experienced we become as language learners. We can all get lots of input and output. Again, something we have direct control over in our language learning. We can all learn to apply the best motivational and habit hacks in our language learning too. We can all create a community which supports our learning and provides opportunities for us to learn the language. This has never been easier with the internet now. I've been to several talks this year about lesser spoken or reviving languages where the importance of the internet, for example, in creating that community has been emphasized. I was also talking to an attendee from India, and I was realizing, hey, you know, there are loads of Indian people of Indian descent living around me in London, very accessible to me. In your own communities, there will be people speaking languages you may be interested in learning, and you can get involved and create opportunities to do that. And also the wider life choices. I talked about this in more detail last year when you're making choices about your job, where you're going to live. You may have flexibility, the milieu, the circles in which you move in your life. You can take decisions which are going to advance your language learning, however much of a tin ear or a bad memory you've got. So let's work with what we can. That's, I think, the message I'd want to leave you with. It's, you know, using the talents you've got in the broadest sense. So not just this cognitive ability, our ear, our memory, our quickness, our analytical incisiveness, but the whole picture. Understand your talent broadly. We've all got some strengths, and it's very important to play to them. You may be good at connecting with people. You may be a great sports person. Get involved in sport through your language. Start there. Meet the people. You get into situations where they're just expecting you to speak the language. You know, it's just a given. So you've got to step up to the plate. And so harness what comes naturally to you and get involved through your own language. So I want you to ask yourself, what of your talents? You may not feel that you are up there with the great polyglots, but what talents do you actually have? What do people say you're good at, or, you know, compliment you on, even backhandedly? And are you using them to the full in your language learning? Are there things that you can change in the way you're organizing your life and your language learning which can help you to play to your strengths? That's me in my Basque class there. That was supposed to illustrate the idea of community and encouraging each other along. So that says, I want to live through the medium of Basque, euskaraz bizi nahi dut, if anybody was wondering. Although those of you with better sort of analytical abilities have probably worked that out already. So, so you may not end up being mistaken for a native. You may not have the best ear. You may not become one of the greatest polyglots. You may not win a polyglot Olympiad. You may never get hired as a UN interpreter. I am also not going to win Wimbledon. It's just not going to happen anymore. Yeah? So our abilities, our talents, our cognitive talents, what we've got in our head does unfortunately differ. Some people are better than others, but hey, that's just what life's like. It's tough. It's not fair. We've got to deal with it. And there are lots of ways, as I said, that we can deal with it. And the consolation prize, we may not be up there with that gold medal, but we can all get fluent in more than one new language, and that can hugely enrich our own lives. So forget about the number of, you know, stickers people have on their badges here at the gathering. Go out there, play to your strengths, and good luck in your language learning. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Gareth. We don't have too many questions yet in Slido, but let's see. There's one question. Where does your conclusion leave us in terms of how we see the, quote, big polyglots? You could say about that, or grab something. Yes. Okay.
How do we see the big polyglots? I don't know. Polyglots are people too, perhaps? I heard a video with from Luca Lamperriello, for example. If we're talking about people who attend these events, who are known for, he's got a great accent, where he was talking about trying to improve his Russian, getting it up from up to, I can't remember, from B2 to C1 or C1 to C2. And he was saying he thought that would take between 6 months and 2 years. That would take him 6 months to 2 years to get up a level. There are some people on there on the Facebook groups and so on saying, I'm starting learning Russian, I'm going to be C1 by Christmas, sort of thing. So the big polyglots are often the most realistic and the most modest. Vladimir Skolkety is another example. I heard him give one talk where he said he was in tears almost with how difficult he was finding Mandarin, and he gave it up several times. I think that's I remember that correctly. He also mentioned that when he started learning Russian, he was listening to Russian for 8 hours a day on the media, Russian news broadcasts, for, I can't remember if it's weeks or months. He's a Slovak speaker. I thought you could more or less work it out, that they're so close. But he was putting in all this time. So some of the great polyglots, some people are more talented than others, and that will always be the case. But remember, too, that, the image of a swan gliding across the pond looks very serene, very relaxed, but underneath the legs are paddling away like crazy. So that's what I'd remember. But anyway, it's, look at yourself and what you need and what you can do with what you've got.
All right, there is one more question. If you're familiar with this, what do you think about the G. Gala Burda hypothesis described in the book Babel No Mire?
I haven't read Babel No More, so I don't want to comment on that. But if anybody else wants to say anything about that, feel free to do so. Any other questions from the floor? Anybody got any particular talent that they put to use or particular interest? You've got a question up there, Peter. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't have a smartphone.
Yeah. Shout it to me. I'll repeat it.
So you mentioned during the talk that you as a learner, your strengths and your weaknesses, and when you have a weak area, you usually try to find workarounds. And I was wondering if you could give us some examples of those workarounds, perhaps.
There is this debate, isn't there? Should you practice what you're not good at, or just, delegate it, if you like, play to your strengths all the time. Workarounds with spelling, for example, I just have to check more. I develop a feeling for, I know what's wrong. I know when I don't know, if you like. Some things just remain difficult. I think they do remain difficult. Sometimes it's just worth not, you don't stress about it, and you may not need particular things, so you may not actually need to write German at a C level. So there's no point stressing about it at this stage. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Yes.
There is a big schisma in my mind between people who think you should speak from day one and those who think you should learn the language and then speak when you know the language. Would you comment on that?
So the question is whether you should speak from day one or whether you should wait until you know more about the language. For me, I'm in two minds about this. I am quite a shy person, a bit of a perfectionist. But you've got to get over that fear of making mistakes. So, but I do also understand the idea. I like, I want to have a map in my head before I'm speaking the language. It's like when you first arrive in a new city, it seems to me. I'm the second time in Bratislava. I was here last year, so I've got a sort of a sense of where everything is. On the way, I was in Vienna, where I'd never been before, and it took me so long to get from the Hauptbahnhof to my accommodation. By the end, I was already moving around, but I wanted to get out there and find the way. So I think, maybe starts with some basic phrases, some toolkit phrases. How do I say this in, Ruritanian? What's the Klingon for that? Whatever it is. Get some basic vocab, but also I want to go away and study the structure of the language, because I like to know what the big picture and what I'm letting myself in for, and to alert myself to what I don't know. So with Basque, I'm hearing, auxiliary verbs in the subjunctive, and I know that that's a subjunctive, but I haven't done that bit yet. So I'm already recognizing things because I've done a bit of studying. But it's not stopping me getting out there and speaking.
Just a slightly random question for you, but am I correct in saying that Spanish is not one of your main languages, but you're learning Basque? And I'm just curious, what's that like? Because obviously most Basque speakers will be Spanish speakers as well. I'm just curious if you had any unique experiences as a result of that, or if that's affected your learning in any way.
That's interesting. Thanks, James, for the question. The question was more of a personal one, that I'm a Basque learner, but I don't speak Spanish, and whether how that sort of impacted on my learning of that language. It is a bit unusual. When I did a month's intensive Basque study in the Basque country at a summer school a couple of years ago, I fell ill, and they had to take me to the doctors. And in the doctor's surgery, there were only a couple of Basque-speaking doctors, so they had to find one. Everyone was pretty amused about that. I am trying to learn Portuguese, one of my A languages, so with signs and so on in Spain I manage. But I kind of quite like the fact. I also learned Welsh earlier on, and one of my flatmates then was actually a Catalan, and I sometimes felt he had a bit of an advantage in Wales, which is a bilingual society. English is the dominant language normally, because he could pretend to, not speak very good English and just get out there, whereas I was more aware of all the sort of issues and complexes from all directions. So it can be an advantage if you don't know the majority language, I think, providing you don't fall ill, I suppose.
Carry on with this question, is Basque a first non-European language that you're learning?
First non-Indo-European?
Yeah. Your first
No, I have also studied Finnish and Hungarian, but so it's not my first one.
Do you think due to the peculiarity of the grammar of Basque that you find it difficult to a different level to learn? Or?
Okay, this is another issue. Maybe I should do a talk on learning Basque at another gathering. But I think with that, I think the answer is it's different. It's not more difficult. It's just different. Again, it comes to how. So it's actually easy, but what is it? It's simple but not easy. I don't know. So I can see that it's actually easy, but I can't quite do it yet. And there are a lot of regularities. Each language has its easy parts, doesn't it? Kirsten. Kirsten's question was whether I have a good reply to the question which many of us may be asked, or to the comment we may be given, sort of, oh, you've got a wonderful talent for languages. Well, I come from the United Kingdom, where if you can sort of grunt vaguely with a French accent, you're taken to be an absolute genius. So I used to say, oh, no. But now actually I just bask in it, to be honest. Is how well you speak your first language a good predictor for how well you will be able to learn others? I'm not up to speed with the research on this. I would imagine that it is, but of course there are also the if you're generally a good verbal person, good skills in your own language, it's likely to transfer across. But of course your attitude towards your languages, including your native culture, could also be a factor there as well. So there's a big subjectivity around each of the languages we speak, I think, including our native language. And as I understand it, the latest research is saying that you know, the brain differences between first and second language speakers are really to do with the amount of practice that you've had and experience, and that apparently the abilities of a very, very experienced second learner become increasingly similar over time to those of a native speaker. It's a slightly different point, perhaps. Any more questions?
Since we're talking about talent for language, could you comment on somebody like Krebs, the guy who was at German embassy in Beijing and learning so many languages?
Okay, I don't know about this guy. Yeah, but so no.
Because it's a question about some innate talent.
No. Well, you're quite right. For example, one of my best mates in Germany when I was a grad student in Heidelberg, he was learning languages in the lunch hour. He could just remember better. You know, he had these Langzeit, 30 Tage things. He could just remember it better than I can. You know, there was no doubt about it. But hey, so there are these differences. But we work with what we've got, and our love for it, is the key thing. One of the best slogans I've heard this time round was somebody said yesterday, one of the talks I was in. It was Tim again. It's not how many languages you know, but how many languages you love, or something like that. So attitude and enthusiasm can make up, I think, for an awful lot, providing we're realistic. We keep our feet on the ground. Yep. Any more, or is that? We've got a couple of minutes. Anyone wants to say anything? Anybody got any particular weaknesses that they have managed to sort of compensate for? Callum?
So the simplest thing is I'm not that good at talking to people and all of that. My solution to that is to start making terrible puns and get people to laugh.
Yeah. So the point was, if you're not very good at talking to people, maybe you sort of make puns and start to make them laugh. So there are ways also to get into conversations with people. Many people who just say, I am an introvert. It's one of my settings. Again, that's not cognitive. That's more different aspects of personality. But and I'm going to read more, and I'm going to interact over Skype more, because I find that more suited to my approach to learning.